Hello,
Hey,
my name is Alex,
and I'm Val.
and we're here watching too much television.
We sure are. I forgot that this was the name of an episode.
Season 4, Episode 7.
Right, of The Sopranos. This
Yes.
is an episode of The Sopranos, watching too much television. I was just complaining that before we did this watching and podcast that we watched too much television, but we really only watched The Sopranos.
We kind of only watch The Sopranos because it kind of ruins everything else.
It really does.
What else are you going to watch? It all sucks.
We typically rotate back and forth between The Wire and The Sopranos.
Yeah, typically at any given time we're just watching either of those for the umpteenth time.
And this episode is kind of like a crossover episode.
Speaking of which, yeah, this is the most Wire-like Sopranos episode I can think of.
We were saying that Christopher was kind of like The Wire, but this is way more The Wire.
Way more. Yeah, I feel like they're kind of like following that desire to kind of deal with like social issues.
The Wire came out in 2002,
Yes.
but I don't know.
Sopranos came out. Season 4 came out in 2002.
This season's also in 2002. It's interesting how both of those things could... I would imagine they're probably like filming around the same time, you know? So it's interesting how both of these shows were kind of dealing with some of these issues that were dealt with in this episode.
Yeah, it would be fascinating if the Sopranos showrunners had never seen The Wire, and that's just sheerly a coincidence. Because there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when they would have been filming or whatever. Like, I don't know if that's even a possibility in the timeline of creating TV shows, but
Yeah.
it's really interesting. Yeah.
But Sopranos also has this like interesting way of being kind of like prescient about things that are to come too. So I wouldn't put it past them to kind of be examining a TV show realm that hadn't really been examined, but also was about to kind of come out and change the game at the same time.
Yeah, no, that doesn't surprise me either. This is another one. This episode is kind of like Christopher in some ways.
In some ways, yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. Like it really, like, this season definitely is focusing on this cultural identity piece, this racial identity piece. We're kind of coming back to some of the things that we visited a little bit in Christopher, right? These stereotypes that exist. But the thing that we're getting, well, and I don't know, actually, we got it in Christopher too. I guess the thing we're getting here is like how people can manipulate these systems and manipulate people in order to profit off of other people's, you know, kind of misfortune, I guess, in some ways. And
then how also the characters rationalize that and still can feel like good people.
Yeah,
because
well, the most interesting ones are Maurice and Zellman.
Yes.
I think. Because they really, like, they tell their backstory, basically, in this episode when they're sitting in the sauna. They talk about, you know, these, like, political or voting campaigns that they work together on, and all these kind of good things they tried to do. And then we have that scene with them when they've both just gotten paid. And they're walking away, right? And they're, I don't know, maybe the conversation happens earlier, but they're like, you know, I have it written down.
Well, there's
somewhere.
multiple conversations, and
I
the thing
know.
that was interesting for me.
Are we the only honest men? Are we supposed
So that was
to
at
be
the
the
Bing.
only honest men?
Just after they get paid, they
Right,
walk
that's
out
what
of
I
the
thought.
office and they
Yeah.
have that conversation.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting conversation because there's kind of this line to follow from Tony to Zellman to Maurice of people rationalizing their bad actions and
with
kind of
this $7,000.
handing it off to the other
Yeah.
person. So originally Tony going to Zellman and basically saying, oh, so we'll take the 7,000 out of your end, and basically he has rationalization for why it's not his problem. And then Zellman goes to Maurice and he's rationalizing, and Maurice actually calls him on it. He actually says, quit rationalizing, it's about the $7,000. So he's actually standing up for the principles of the thing.
But then he goes ahead and hires some young kids to.
But then he does it, and then he has a rationalization in the end. So he's actually
Yeah.
corrupted by the time the episode finishes, and he says, "Are we supposed to be the only honest guys?"
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, and you can see how people are corrupted,
Yeah.
but it's also kind of like a faulty examination of the whole issue. I mean, of course, there are honest people out there, and you have the opportunity to be an honest, good person and do the right thing and not manipulate the system and basically be responsible for having people shot and, you know, thrown out of their home through violence. And I mean, home is kind of a
No, it's their home.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. For me, this episode talks a lot about like the lies that people tell
Yes.
and the manipulations that people do. And so like I think it also brings like it also calls to mind for me the fact that there's these manipulations happening on all levels of our lives, right? So there's these like personal manipulations that are happening, and then there's these larger like government sized manipulations that are going on. And
Yeah.
so that it is hard to be, you know, like if you stand out. I can't think of a single character who does stand out as this person in Soprano world. Like, who is the only honest person in Sopranos?
Almost nobody. I mean,
I
occasionally.
think definitely nobody.
Well, I think there are times where we will point out like somebody doing the right thing, but it's very, very rare. Like maybe like I'm thinking of like 1 or 2 times we've seen an example of somebody who like breaks the cycle of something.
Yeah.
And nothing's even coming to mind right now because it's so rare.
Yeah. So I think that's a really key point for The Sopranos. I think, to be fair, it's also a key point for The Wire.
Yeah. No, there was a few things like that kind of trajectory from Tony of kind of like passing down the buck through people. I don't know. There was like these like connection points and seeing how somebody's actions can impact somebody else. Like we've examined Tony psychologically to know that he often does project these things onto other people. And there's even like multiple cases in this episode, like when he's with Melfi and he's addressing his anger over like knocking over the tissue holder and he's like, well, I picked it up. Like he has a way of not owning up for the things that he does that are wrong. And so it was interesting for me to see how that passes from him as a character to Zellman to Maurice. It kind of like filters through people. So as we normally focus on Tony as kind of the center of this show, it kind of now is expanding into this broader world and affecting the kind of social order.
Yeah, no, I definitely see what you mean. I think there's something larger for Tony in this episode when it comes to that, though, because of what we have him do to Zellman at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is something, like, he can deal with Zellman being a not honest assemblyman throughout their whole kind of like careers together, but it's not that like he was dishonest with Tony. He was actually really upfront with Tony about dating Irina and like came to him and wanted to talk to him about it. But that's like a more egregious kind of thing to do to Tony, right? Like Tony would have never Tony can't brush that one aside and like, you know, they're not on the same team on that one or something. So it's like if someone else is, I don't want to call it dishonest, but if someone else's like poor behavior impacts you poorly, that's the only time where you're really like affronted by it. And we see that with like the people who are living in the house that's been bought by the Dick Doctor. And, you know, like we see the impact of these schemes and everything on others, and we can imagine the impacts of a lot of these other events that take place within this show. But when it happens to Tony, he's really like, he can't deal with that. He can't deal with it on his end. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, how about the title? Watching too much television. For me, that was an interesting one because typically there's multiple interpretations of the title and they kind of filter into the episode in a lot of different ways. For me, like that title links most strongly to Adriana and the television that she's watching a lot in this episode.
I mean, only twice.
No, I think there's even more. Like and also like in the previous episode, she's kind of around like watching some weird show. Like she's clearly like in a bit of a funk. Like she's in a kind of like a spiral. And then I think that the television aspect to her, she's watching that show and they say like big reveal, like, but we're married, we can't testify. Like the way that scene is treated, there's almost like 2 levels to it. Like she's watching the show and then that kind of like changes her decision making
and they zoom really
and her
slowly
trajectory
into
and then
her
they
face.
very, very slowly
With
zoom
the
into her
dramatic
face
music
with like
in the
string
background.
pads going on. It's
Well,
like
I think it's the music from the TV show
it is.
/ movie.
Yeah, but it's like mood music, and it's like way, way, way overdone. And it's funny because I think there is this like heightened drama that actually makes it kind of fake.
Yeah.
And that Adriana is investing her hopes for how she can get out of the situation in basically a fantasy and something that is dramatic. It's drama and isn't really grounded. Like even when she talks to her friend and her friend is like, oh, well, the murder she wrote says that that's not actually true. And then obviously, like in Sopranos, as it always is, when she goes to meet the lawyer, it's much more complicated than a simple black and white, and that she could solve her problem through doing something.
Right. Well, so to go back to the title, like the only other time she's watching TV is later on in the episode with the A-Team, which I think is like unrelated to this other thing, but it is related to kind of like the racial tension because the A-Team is this like multiracial super team.
Yeah. Just like Zellman, Maurice, and Tony.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why it's relevant to Adriana necessarily. Like I don't, obviously you can make that connection with the first time she's watching television in this episode to how that impacts her decisions that are made throughout the hour of the show, whatever, throughout the episode.
Yeah.
But I don't really get that connection later on with the A-Team. And I don't know. I don't really know about the watching too much television title and who else. Like I've rarely seen a Sopranos title that just like applies to like the fact that Adriana was watching television.
Right. No, it's an interesting one. It was just something that kind of caught my attention because, I mean, for me, like that scene where, I mean, that was a pivotal scene, I think, for Adriana as a character where she feels that she can solve this problem by being married. And that actually is one of the few instances where the plot is pushed forward. And when I think about the form of season 4, like what's happening in this episode, basically it's kind of another standalone episode with this scam that they start and finish in the episode. I mean, I guess Irina's back, but that kind of starts and finishes too. It's not really pushing the narrative forward. But Adriana has this idea, and that pushes forward them getting married, which is relevant to the bigger picture.
Right.
But it's stemming from not a sophisticated grasp of the material, right? And she's kind of getting it from television. Like that's kind of her source.
I'm just trying to think if there's anything else in this episode that links to that, but I can't.
Well, that's the thing to me. Like it doesn't seem like there's that much. That's why for me, I wanted to kind of talk to you about it just because for me, the watching too much television links most to Adriana. And I was thinking of how it did to others. And it didn't seem like that's what it was about.
Yeah, I can't think of
something. Then again, they are very smart, and maybe I just don't see it.
They're way smarter than us. Well, and the team on this episode was huge.
Yeah, and that's interesting, too. Like, the story was basically all the key writers, including David Chase. And then written by Terrence Winter and Nick Satura, and then directed by John Patterson. So that's like a pretty strong team for them. Those are senior.
The teleplay was written, and then the story was by everyone. Green, Burgess, David Chase,
all the people.
Terrence Winter.
Yeah.
John Patterson was directing.
Yeah.
And so usually when that happens, it's a key kind of episode.
Yes.
I don't know that I see this episode this way in particular, how do I say it? Like, differently than I see most other episodes. That's like the one time where I've kind of been surprised by that there wasn't like a more, but I guess it's kind of like Christopher. I don't know, like there is this a little bit more like over your head messaging going on.
Yeah, totally.
Hitting you over the head messaging going on.
Yeah, I feel like they're kind of going for something new. Like this concept of the irony of Tony being critical of handouts, because that comes out a lot.
Right.
From Ralphie, from Tony. Man, there's more handout programs. Tony saying all these things about, hard work, and then basically straight up, manipulating these HUD programs to steal money from the government is like the chief irony that's happening here, that they're so unaware of their actions and how it impacts society, and yet they can still be critical and rationalize, their own beliefs that basically just benefit them is really like at the core of this episode for me.
Right. Yeah. The other thing to me is how people kind of perceive others' manipulation of them. And so like Tony says to Melfi in this episode that she lied to him about Gloria, right? And Melfi says back, that she didn't disclose it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then we also have Chris saying to Adriana, like, that she lied about, like, he was like, how could you lie to me?
Yeah.
And And I think that's the thing and clearly she omitted it. It was an omission.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't know. For me, there is this other element of it. Like, I think like definitely the handouts and like commenting on that kind of social commentary. But I think it is just like about how we can fool people into, or I don't even know how to say it.
Yeah.
Like kind of the manipulations that take place throughout, and maybe that's the link to watching too much television, is like television is typically this kind of facade, or I don't know, like it's not reality, right? It's showing things in a way that isn't real. And so I think like when, like with this episode and with Christopher, the episode, for example, I think it's kind of playing with that as well. Like it is this episode was also kind of like hyper dramatic and weird. Like, and we have like non-diegetic music, and we have these weird zooms, and we have these weird fades. I think they're kind of playing with that concept of the things we see on television,
Right.
as manipulations,
Yeah.
right? And so they're kind of playing with that
Totally.
that medium in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
And then we have, like, just, you know, again, speaking of TV, we have Dr. Freed
Yeah.
come back. And I'm positive that on previous viewings of this show, which I've seen it, like, now a lot of times, I don't think I recognized him as the Dick Doctor, but I did this time.
Congratulations.
And thank you.
Good Dick Doctor sighting.
But he, of course, had his kind of, like, TV persona, right? And he's this kind of, this almost fake doctor, I feel like.
Yeah.
He's not even a real doctor. He's like a TV doctor.
He's the one, for people who don't watch The Sopranos a trillion times. We were talking about in a previous podcast, there's an episode where, well, he's shown up in the executive game, but then later he's like filming his ad.
And then he's
And we see him
called to-
on set, and then we see that from multiple perspectives, where it becomes apparent that he really is on a set as he films an ad for his practice. And now he shows up again.
Yeah. Involved in this grand scheme.
Yeah. Totally. I was interested in the scene where Tony takes AJ to the church. I thought that was an interesting one, where he's talking about things like, again, getting back to the kind of focus on social issues and the hypocrisy of Tony's political beliefs, where Tony's talking about this neighborhood used to be beautiful, and he talks about responsibility and building something. And then there's some rather heavy-handed moves for The Sopranos, but for me it works, where after you see the opposite side of the street, where you see the kind of falling apart housing.
Right. I think it's kind of AJ's point of view. That was my perspective on that. Like, as he's on that side of the car,
Right.
and as Tony's talking, he kind of looks to that side, and then our view changes to the view of like the trash outside the apartment
Right.
units, not to the side of the church.
Right. Interesting.
Anyways,
Yeah.
that's just how I.
And then there's an edit to the houses that they're actually buying, which,
Yes.
again, by Soprano standards, rather heavy-handed to make those connections after they're
Yes.
talking about it outright. But I like it. It's good, and they are entering that kind of realm of kind of tackling these issues head on. But for me, it's really the theme of Tony is talking about the importance of building something and honoring the work of their ancestors and kind of putting that up on a pedestal. But the reality is that all Tony does is he loots. It's really like the action of looting versus building.
Yeah, and for some reason he's there near the end of the episode when Vito and his buddies are taking out all the copper piping.
Right.
I don't know why Tony.
Yeah, why
would
is he
need
there?
To be
That
there
seems
for
risky.
that.
If he couldn't stay
He's
in
like
the steam
drinking
bath.
coffee. I know. It's sometimes I'm like, why is like he's just there for convenience. Like it's also one of those moments in Sopranos, which usually is so true to life, where like Zalman sees Tony driving down the street when he's doing something completely
Right.
different on his job.
Right.
But but yeah, like he does. That's all he does is he takes advantage of opportunities and he loots what's there for the taking.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no building. Like, Tony isn't involved in the construction of anything. He just tears it down.
Yeah.
And I think-
guess he kind of owns construction companies, kind of.
But all he really does with them is no-shows.
Yeah.
And, and no works.
Yeah.
Which is,
I didn't know there was a difference.
of course there's a difference between no-shows and no
Oh,
works.
sorry. We don't need to go into it, I guess.
We can go into it.
You can tell me later.
In further podcasts, we can
Yeah.
talk about it. We can devote whole podcasts.
You can just
to the
tell me
difference.
later on after we finish
Yeah.
talking in this podcast.
It was also interesting because AJ and Tony are having this father-son moment.
There's fishing rods. They had just been
fishing rods, right. And Tony is talking about how, you know, I'm your father, I'm imparting wisdom as your father, you know, listen to me. But then the only like real like rise we see out of AJ where he actually like really responds is when Tony is making fun of the guy's sister.
Yeah, he's like proud of Tony. He's like laughing at him and like thinking he's a tough guy.
Tony's like offending her, you know, he says like you blew your father, and AJ like laughs. You know, like laughs. And then, you know, he kind of follows suit and he says like, oh, that's a crack whore. But like that's really making a mockery of the family institutions that Tony is supposedly putting up there for AJ.
Right.
He's talking about, you know, the importance of being a father and then making fun of this person's father immediately after. And that's what AJ actually responds to.
Yeah. And then it is interesting that scene where Tony doesn't really respond, right? When the guy shows his gun.
Yeah.
And he's like, this is our neighborhood now. And Tony, this expression comes across James Gandolfini's face. And he says, I can see that.
Right.
And they drive away, right? He's not confrontational with them at that point.
Mm-hmm.
AJ that's when AJ then tosses out that comment like, was that a crack whore or whatever he says. Right. But it's interesting, like and then he brings that up in Melfi's office later on. He's like, this guy was assaulting us or whatever, and I didn't even respond.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. No, absolutely. What else do you have?
I don't know. I wanted to talk about a little bit more about Adriana.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about belts.
Belts, yeah.
I wanted to talk about drugs.
Drugs, yeah. Horse.
A horse. I wanted to talk about the music in this episode.
Okay.
I think that's...
Let's start. Your choice.
Let's talk about drugs.
Okay.
So I think we definitely do see Christopher's drug problem getting a lot worse. Mm-hmm. And the agents who work with Adriana definitely like try to use that against her, you know, like they try to really focus on that for whatever like whatever their kind of tactic is at that point to like kind of try to turn Adriana against Christopher is clearly not working.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're like, you know, he's on drugs, he was in New York with these people. They try to like get her to doubt him or turn on him, and she really doesn't.
Yeah.
With the drug thing, they're not really getting her either.
You can see though, like I feel like it's implied that they're attacking Adriana for her drug use too.
Totally.
Yeah, where they say, you know, like, how's Christopher's drug problem? And then she faces her. And then Sanseverino faces straight to Adriana and she says, how are you?
Yeah.
And there's kind of this pause and it's kind of implied that she's asking about her drug problem.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting, like, in that scene where they're all sitting around. They're such, I mean, like, whatever. I guess the FBI are good people, but these guys are jerks. And that scene
Not
where
Agent Harris. I like Agent Harris.
Even him, he says something really mean, and I forget what it was. Like, about like Darwin or something like that, like weeding out, like, when Danielle discloses, Danielle / whatever her name actually is, discloses that Adriana can't have kids.
Right.
Oh, he like natural selection. Maybe that was the boss. Anyways, no, he was mean. Agent Harris was mean.
You're over it.
Usually I like him, but he was really mean on this episode. But they kind of take another tack, right? They're deciding on whether or not they should be like supportive / neutral,
right,
about her marrying Christopher, and they go through all these benefits and, you know, of whether she marries him or not.
Yeah.
And then they decide, like, oh, great, like, they have our blessing. And it's almost like they're cheersing with champagne like they do in the rest of the episode, right? They're sitting there, like, drinking Cokes. But it's, you know, they've come up with this new way to manipulate.
Totally, yeah. And there were some things, too, like, in terms of referencing Danielle's relationship with Adriana. Like, when she had the line, like, what's wrong with this girl?
Yeah,
about her marrying Christopher.
He's tall, dark, and sociopathic.
that kind of like for me like completes the character that she was just completely fabricating this relationship with her,
Yeah.
because it did seem believable to me
Yeah.
at least, and I feel like us as an audience.
Yeah.
But it really is like she just has like no relationship to her, and it
Yeah.
was just completely made.
And then of course like we have Christopher and Adriana using drugs, right? But then we see the people who live in the houses that Tony or Dr. Freed just bought, right? And we see that side of kind of like the drug trade / drug use, and we see how it can really be like, depending on your perspective, it can be really construed in different ways. Like there's such a history of like racism involved in the drug wars, right? Like when you talk about like cocaine versus crack cocaine, for
Right.
example, right? So you see how this really, like Chris's drug use of heroin, he comes from this like other more privileged perspective where he's still like, I don't know, respected by his colleagues and stuff like this, right? I mean, he's sitting in his car getting high, and then we see, you know, these other people who are using whatever they're
Right.
using and selling, and like the life that they lead just based on like where they were born, kind of thing, and who they are. So I think, anyways, like the drug thing continues to get worse.
Yeah, like that
No
connection
spoilers.
between Christopher and the people in those houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And just like the level of like, you know, being manipulated or being threatened.
Yeah.
I can't quite put my finger on it, but there is some kind of link between the two of them.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, how do we interpret their drug use, and how do the characters around them deal with it? It's interesting because, yeah, we maybe see them differently.
Yeah.
You had so many things.
I
You
know.
had so many points there. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, well, I don't know. I was going to talk about belts.
There's a lot of belts.
I feel like there's been a lot of references to belts. And
Yeah.
Also seeing belts. So we talked we didn't talk about it really, but last episode it was mentioned that Gloria was hanging from her belt. That's how she killed herself. And then we have Tony, of course, beating Zellman
Right.
with a belt in this scene. And we also have Chris using a belt for when he's injecting heroin in his car. He's using a belt to constrict his blood flow around his arm.
Yes. We also have Tony putting on his belt when he's talking to Zellman earlier, kind of connecting those two scenes
Right.
in the change room.
So I don't know what that is. Like belts, I don't know. They hold up our pants. Like I'm
Well,
trying
I think it's also, like, for me, it's Tony was clearly very affected by Gloria dying, and
Yeah.
maybe there's an aspect of him attacking Zellman as, like, taking that out on someone. Because he was he wasn't there. He feels responsible for Gloria's death. It's like getting some of that power back to use it against somebody else or something.
Yeah, well, belts have a history of violence. I know that's like a
Yeah.
strange thing to say about belts, but they do, right?
Welcome to the Belt Podcast,
Yeah.
where we talk about all things belt. We hope you enjoy. We love belts.
Yeah, belts. They're great. And anyways, but like, you know, like they are used in the way that Tony used it today. Like especially when they focus on like him hitting Zellman on his butt
Yeah.
with the belt. I don't know. There's like a real focus on that.
Yeah, there's definitely,
on that
again,
hit.
there's something like being a father or something. And I think there is like a
Yeah.
power dynamic that Tony wants. Interestingly about that scene, I was trying to remember the interview. I'm almost positive it was Terrence Winter. There's an interview with him, and he references this episode. I'm sorry if it wasn't Terrence Winter, but I'm pretty sure. You can go searching for it and let us know. But
Well, how are they going to search for it if it's
oh my
not
God,
Terrence
they'll
Winter?
find it. I believe
Okay.
in the Sopranos community.
Okay.
But it's talk about how they knew as writers that like Tony Soprano, or he knew that Tony Soprano would respond to knowing that Irina was with Zellman like this, with violence, and that he would go and beat the guy up basically. And that the idea wasn't really like accepted at first, that it was like a little like, really, like what, that seems kind of strong. But again, Terrence was saying like almost
You guys
definitely
are on a
Terrence.
first-name
Yeah,
basis.
me and Terrence were talking, and from growing up around people like this, like around the New Jersey kind of like mob types, that there was just like a knowledge that that is how Tony would respond to this, like as this kind of like New Jersey tough guy. And so it was interesting to actually see it after having seen that interview. and just thinking that Tony is this kind of like rough person who can't take that. And there's also something more basic, that he's just the kind of person who would respond to seeing his ex-girlfriend by beating up the guy. Like, that's just who he is. And it's a reminder for us of who Tony Soprano is.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of person he is.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about belts. And I really do think this is a great idea for a new podcast to do it about belts.
Yeah.
But
black belts, studded belts, leather belts.
Belts are constricting.
Yes.
Belts are.
You got your long belts. You got your.
No, but there's something. Anyway, I can't like. Belts are
suspenders.
Belts are not suspenders. You pick one or the other.
I'm sorry. That's another podcast.
You have to pick one or the other.
Okay.
That's a suspenders podcast.
No, but there is a lot, and there's like this connective tissue, and clearly whenever anything shows up in this show multiple times, it is worth thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that's showing up, just before we move on to something else, just in terms of Adriana, in terms of Christopher, in terms of drugs and belts, I didn't realize, I think in past viewings, how much he's obsessed with, like, again, like I said last episode, I think, like, his obsession, his saying, like, Tony did something really big for me, or whatever. But then it's kind of shifted this obsession with, like, his bloodline, right? So he is, like, really, I mean, the scene with him and Adriana is super hard to watch.
Yeah.
When he's, you know, like,
that is a hard scene.
He calls her damaged goods, and, you know, he's like, you lied to me, and he storms out. And, so he's really obsessed with his bloodline. And I think that goes back into kind of this, like, talking about fathers and belts.
Absolutely.
Also.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I think that's a really good point. I thought that was an interesting scene too, like right before it happens, in terms of some of the things that the scene is able to imply just about Adriana's manipulation to bring up the marriage. There are some things I love just in the writing that's so subtle, like right away there's the candles we can see. Christopher says, "Good dinner, baby." So again, this like usage of food for Adriana to then bring up something that she wants.
She's wearing a great outfit.
Wearing a great outfit. What is it?
It's like a black leather miniskirt and a crop top.
Oh, she likes that. So... yeah, so the fact that Adriana has this agenda, and then she's making a special dinner for Christopher, and then she plans to bring it up, even though it's seemingly off the cuff. Like, again, using food as manipulation, like we've seen Carmela doing, like we've talked about in previous episodes. Also, like, it's a weird scene, but where she talks about, like, and your wife can't testify against you in court, and then, like, moves her foot over. No, she moves her foot over to his crotch.
Oh, yeah.
It's like... again, she's like using this like sexual manipulation to kind of, again, like get this idea out about wives not being able to testify against their husbands.
I'm surprised he wasn't like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I'm surprised he wasn't like...
well, I think she's like a little bit, she's a little bit uneven right now. Like there has been these times where Christopher's saying like, you're saying all this negative shit, because she is putting out things because she has so much that she's keeping to herself.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. Just again to kind of wrap up Adriana.
Yeah.
She goes wedding dress shopping, so they do decide to get married, and she wears really weird gloves with her wedding dress. Just to say that.
What about her belt?
She wasn't wearing a belt.
Oh, okay, no belt.
And she also has her wedding shower, which for some reason Meadow is like front and center beside her. I didn't
also
know,
wearing a very strange outfit.
A strange outfit. I didn't know they were that close.
They're best friends.
They're not. That's not part of this show. We have a few shots of Cosette barking at Christopher when he enters the space.
Yeah.
Just to keep in mind.
Yeah. Love Cosette.
And yeah, what else do you... I just have the music thing.
Mm-hmm. Which music?
Well, there's kind of two scenes that had strange music for me. The first one was when they were in the changing room after the steam bath, sauna, whatever they were doing together, the Russian bath. And this music kind of comes out of nowhere. Like Zellman's
this is the Shy Lights music,
Zellman's
it is strange.
Told Tony this information, and then it like crops up, and there wasn't music beforehand.
I know. Why would the steam baths be playing this music? I like this music, but
I don't know. So I just wanted to point that out. And then we have Tony when he's driving later on, and he seems pretty wasted. and he's driving, and then he makes that decision to go and beat up Zalman.
Yeah.
We have that music from his car playing over the whole rest of the episode.
Right.
So again, like I kind of mentioned, this kind of more dramatic, non-realistic kind of feel to this episode.
It's interesting, but then it's also mixed with realism, right? Like it
Yeah.
is source music, but then the realism is still suspended because
Yeah.
it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, the one at the beginning makes less sense. The one in the Russian bath.
We
for
kind of
me.
accept it, and it's
Yeah.
actually like referenced in their conversation. But it's
Yeah.
interesting, right? Like
Yeah.
they use diegetic music.
Yeah,
but
and why do they reference it?
because
that's
it's
the
real and it's making it. But then there is this kind of like you have to kind of question the television to be like, wait a minute, that's fucking weird.
I guess so, yeah. No, I know, but like it's really weird how they talk about that piece of music, and I can't figure that out. Mm-hmm. And then the fact at the end that this piece of music has moved Tony to be so emotional that he needs to go beat up Zalman. I
Yeah.
don't know. We also have a couple weird like fade outs and fade ins. Like actually at the beginning of the episode, we have this fade in where you can like kind of hear laughter before you see anything, and then it's Polly's party and Polly's back and
Polly's back.
talking as much as ever. And then at the end we have this fade out with the music still playing, and Irina's there, you know, kind of not caring about Zalman lying on the floor.
Or is she? It's complicated.
I don't know if I was going to say it's nice to see Irina again, but there she is. She's also going to language classes.
She's doing very well.
She is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, talking about like the zoom ins and stuff, so John Patterson is directing this, who typically does season finales. He's done a lot of the season finales for this show. I love some of the camera work, actually. Like it's
Yeah.
amazing. Like some of the way that there's a lot of movement that's really cool. There's a number of shots just where like they'll let somebody kind of like walk into a room and then they'll kind of like spin the camera around.
It's like someone's walking and the camera moves in the other direction as they're walking, but also turns at the same time.
Yeah, it's cool. They use like these like slow fades on Adriana and then like and other characters as well. Like it seems very purposeful. And then there's also a lot of fades on and focus on houses.
Right.
Which is interesting because
we have a lot of characters going to houses.
yeah, and we see them like entering the houses. And I think that we focus on the houses of these players in this HUD scam, of Maurice, of Zellman. And I think that there's a connection there between where they live and between their manipulation of the system and manipulating what's supposed to be providing houses for people who are less fortunate.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, that's a really interesting thing. And again, kind of playing into the like, these are the players who are profiting off of this looting, and then here is where they live, which is obviously much more, desirable and affluent.
Yeah. Well, and they both have nice houses. I mean, Zalman's house, he has like a piano with a Chopin
Yeah.
book on it and
Yeah.
some Picasso-looking art prints.
He's got some alcohols.
He's got alcohol. He has Irina's shoes. Then we have Maurice's house, which is like all like wood paneling, and they clearly have like a study
Yeah.
that he went into, or I guess they called it the den, but
Yeah.
it was all wood paneled.
Yeah.
Nice houses.
Yeah. I thought it was also a cool shot when the like cleanup crew, these youth come to get everybody out of the buildings. The first shot we see is this guy who is grabbing bottles and then like into a bag to sell them, which is just like really subtle. And then he's the kind of crazy guy who says, I said crack was some bad shit at the end.
Yeah.
But the way that they start that off, that there's like somebody disconnected from this who is there and kind of like impacted by this action, who isn't actually doing drugs. It's just kind of like not only setting the scene of this environment and this community, but also kind of, I don't know, for me, like a very interesting kind of suggestion of the people who are doing work, even if it is that on that kind of scale, they actually are like doing something to collect these bottles to change it in for money, that they're not all like just taking handouts or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's true.
That everybody is blaming everybody there for.
We also have a continuation of the soap opera of Furio and Carmela.
Miss Soap. And Miss Soap.
Miss Soap.
Miss Soap. Carmela Soap.
Oh yeah, Miss Soap. That's right. We see Furio call her, and it's raining, and for some reason he thinks that he should talk about his sunglasses.
Yeah.
and she doesn't have them, and he says that she looks pretty in a picture. And then the next time we see him, he's over it.
Well, is he though?
She's not.
You know what's interesting, actually? That's another example of two characters where we have those zoom-ins. Like I was talking about with Adriana. Furio gets a zoom-in, and Carmela gets a zoom-in. Yeah. I don't think he is over it. I think he just realizes the danger he's in. I think it's the opposite. I think he's not over it.
I guess we don't see him realize the danger he's in.
No, I think it's that, he is obviously attracted to her. And for me, like, that scene where he's calling her is implying that he has no reason to call her. It's not really about having her look for this thing that he left there.
No, it's about he put his sunglasses in his glove compartment before he called her.
It's crazy.
What a manipulator.
Oh, everybody's manipulating. Furio is so not over it.
But I don't know. The scene where then he comes and is weird. I don't.
Well, no, I think he recognizes his attraction to Carmela, and he knows that can't be a thing.
Yeah.
And so he's just distancing himself to protect everybody.
Yeah.
To protect himself. And
Brian should distance himself.
But now he's that sweet watch.
He's got a sweet watch. He's got Tony's drill.
Yeah, which in season 5 Tony will be looking for.
He gave good advice on what Tony should do, but he went to this crazy Polly welcome back party.
Yep. Yeah. Wasn't he doing blow off of strippers?
Probably.
He's going nuts.
Yeah. No, he was licking something off of a stripper's boob.
Okay.
Salt for his tequila, I think.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, a couple other small things for me.
Yeah.
We have Adriana and San Severino when they meet.
Right.
It's in this kind of like card store, and she even like pulls up this card. For me, it was very similar to Big Pussy and that Elvis impersonator, which for me was kind of full of danger. Like this idea of, we know what happened to Big Pussy, and when he met Elvis, that led to horrible things. Like Big Pussy was so kind of off-put by seeing somebody that he knew that he actually went and killed him. But then there's kind of this connection and this connective tissue of where the FBI is meeting their current informants that makes it feel dangerous for me.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting.
Also, she's creepy, Agent San Severino.
Yeah.
I like when Adriana's like, you should get a haunted house or something.
She should.
Yeah.
I thought there was another interesting kind of connective tissue thing with Christopher when he's having this fight with Adriana, and he says, my kid, what if we adopt, we're gonna have someone with chinky eyes called Moltisanti, which refers to that season 2 episode 1, where the very first thing we see is like a pause, and then we see Moltisanti, and there's an Asian person who's pretending to be him.
Maybe that's their future child.
Maybe. But for me, what it's really about is like the lack of awareness of manipulating these systems, like having principles when you blatantly break them, and you have principles about how society should run, but you are responsible for the downfall. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah. Otherwise, Tony and Melfi, like when he was kind of upset and basically passing things off to her and saying, you picked up the tissue holder, just before when Melfi is saying, I want to talk about your violence about your outbreak. And
your outbreak.
your outrage.
Yeah.
But Tony is saying, didn't you get the flowers I sent?
Yeah.
And, and basically, and it's funny because we've just seen in a previous episode, Tony getting flowers for Carmela and sitting there alone with them. Seeing into Tony as a character as somebody who thinks that he can solve problems by getting people flowers.
Yeah, I also like his reaction in that scene. Like, she's kind of going off, and then he looks, like, perplexed, and he's like, didn't you get the flowers?
Yeah.
Like, it's the way he says it, too. He's like, hold on, I thought we were good here. I sent you flowers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not how it works, Tony. So, next time you have an outbreak, flowers won't cut it. I love belts. They're so... I love them. I love belts.
We shouldn't do podcasts so late at night.
It's okay. We like to. So thank you for listening.
See you next time.
See you next time. I'm Alex.
And I'm Val.
And we'll see you next time.
And please rate and review our podcast.
We would love that.
It's a popular time for Sopranos right
now.
Yeah, it's the
20-year anniversary. This month. It's January 2019 right now.
And if you like this and you've listened to this whole episode about belts, then send us a message.
Yeah, please rate and review us in the belt store.